Every Christmas, my mother would say the same words always, with that careful tone that made cruelty sound almost polite. "There just isn't enough room for you and the kids this year, honey." I'd stand on her porch in the cold holding 2 gift bags in one hand and my daughter's mittened fingers in the other, pretending not to hear the laughter coming from inside. Through the frosted glass, I could see the glow of the tree, my sister's twins tearing open, presents my parents smiling, like everything in the world was right where it belonged. But we weren't part of that picture. Not anymore. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to build your own place in the world when no one else made room for you. My name's Natalie Warren, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one who doesn't quite fit. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a house that always smelled like lemon polish and Sunday dinners. My parents believed in appearances, clean lawns, perfect, smiles, good reputations. My sister Melissa learned early how to shine under their approval. I was quieter, the kind of child who noticed things, who heard the sigh before the smile, who understood when praise had strings attached. I went to college on a scholarship, married young, and thought that would finally make me enough. But life has a way of showing you what's real when the glitter fades. When my marriage ended last spring, it wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no slammed doors, just 2 tired people signing papers across a wooden table, trying not to make eye contact. Jacob kept the house in Charlotte. I took the kids, packed the car, and drove home to Charleston, telling myself I was going back for family, for support, for stability, for the comfort of what I once knew. What I found instead was the same unspoken hierarchy I'd grown up under now, with new rules about where I did and didn't belong. My parents welcomed me politely. Mom gave that thin smile that said she was trying to be gracious. Dad mentioned how hard it must be to start over. And Melissa, well, she didn't say anything at all. She didn't have to. She showed up to our first family dinner in a dress that could have paid my rent for 3 months, and asked if my little apartment had enough space for the kids to share a room. Every word was dressed like kindness, but built to remind me of my place. That apartment wasn't much 2 bedrooms old tile and a faucet that never stopped dripping, but it was ours. I found work at a small marketing firm downtown. The pay wasn't great, but I was good at it. I stayed up late after the kids went to sleep, taking on freelance design projects, logos, copywriting small business websites. It wasn't just about money. It was about building something that couldn't be taken away one late night at a time. Sometimes I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and sketch the kind of life I wanted not just for me, but for Leah and Ben. Leah once taped one of those sketches to our fridge. It showed a big house with a red door snow on the roof and 3 stick figures holding hands. Underneath, in her careful first-grade handwriting, she'd written, "Home. Just us." I looked at it every morning before work, reminding myself why I kept going, even when exhaustion pressed heavy against my ribs. Every client I took, every dollar I saved, every late night was another brick toward that dream, a dream where my kids would never stand outside wondering why they weren't welcome. By fall, things were shifting. My boss called me into his office after a pitch meeting and said I had a natural sense for storytelling. I didn't think much of it, but 2 weeks later, he promoted me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I started believing maybe I could turn those sketches into something real. But believing and belonging aren't the same thing. I learned that again on the night of Mom's early December dinner. She called to say she was having a small gathering. I offered to bring dessert. There was a pause long enough to say more than words could. "Oh, sweetie," she finally replied, "there just isn't enough room this time." "You understand." I did. I understood perfectly. That night, I sat on the edge of my kids' beds and promised myself something I'd never said aloud before, that this would be the last Christmas we spent waiting for permission to exist in someone else's story. If my family couldn't make space for us, then I would build a new table. I didn't know how, not yet. But I knew one thing for sure: next year, we wouldn't be standing on a porch looking in. We'd be opening our own front door. That December night stayed with me, the image of my mother's porch light flickering through the frost as we drove away. The kids were half asleep in the back seat, their faces lit by passing streetlights. Leia whispered questions I didn't know how to answer, and Ben clutched the reindeer plush he'd wanted to show his grandmother. By the time we got home, the quiet was so heavy, it felt alive. I tucked them into bed and stared at the empty corner of the living room where a Christmas tree should have been. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon from the cookies we'd baked together, but the warmth had gone out of the night. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. My phone buzzed once, a text from Melissa Hope. "You're not too upset. Mom was just overwhelmed this year." I stared at it for a long moment, then put the phone face down. The truth was, it wasn't just this year. The distance had been forming quietly for years, drip by drip, until I stopped noticing how often I was left out. There had been birthdays I hadn't been invited to because we thought you were busy. A retirement party I only learned about through photos online. Little things small enough to dismiss if you wanted to believe the best. Still, each omission stung. When I mentioned it, Mom would smile as though the problem was my perception. "Oh, honey, you know you're always welcome," she'd say, her voice soft but final. But that welcome never came with space at the table. It came with explanations that the house was full or that Melissa's family needed the guest rooms. Somehow there was never quite enough room when it came to me and the kids. I learned to stop asking. Work was the one place where I didn't feel like an afterthought. The office was small, tucked above a cafe downtown, filled with the scent of roasted coffee and printer ink. I liked the rhythm of it, designing, writing, fixing campaigns, until the details clicked into place. My boss, Alan Pierce, had a good eye for people. He didn't say much, but he noticed. When I stayed late to meet a deadline, he'd leave a note on my desk the next morning. "Good work, Natalie. You made this shine." Those quiet acknowledgments meant more than I'd admit. At night, after I put the kids to bed, I worked on freelance projects at the same kitchen table where I'd once felt so small. I built logos for small businesses, designed websites for cafes and yoga studios, wrote copy for people chasing their own dreams. I told myself that each project, each deposit into my savings account, was a step towards something better. One evening in late February, I was sorting through emails when Leia came into the kitchen with a piece of paper in her hand. "Look, Mommy," she said proudly. It was a drawing of a big house with a red door smoke curling from the chimney. 3 stick figures stood out front holding hands. Underneath, she'd written in uneven letters, "Home, just us." I taped it to the fridge that night. It stayed there, a small promise to myself that next Christmas would be different. Spring came fast that year. Work picked up and my freelance calendar filled before I even realized it. Local businesses were starting to find me through word of mouth, a coffee shop owner who wanted a rebrand, a law firm that needed help with social media. My days blurred into early mornings and late nights, but it was the kind of busy that made me feel alive. When the kids woke up, I was there for breakfast. When they went to sleep, I opened my laptop again and worked until the numbers in my bank account finally began to look like progress. By May, I'd saved enough to start thinking about a different kind of future. Alan called me into his office one afternoon after a client presentation. He had that expression he wore when he was about to say something important. "You've got real instincts," he said simply. "You make people feel something through your work. We need more of that here." 2 weeks later, I was promoted to senior marketing associate. I told the kids by taking them to the park for ice cream. Leia wanted to know if that meant we could buy a house now. I smiled, but I didn't answer. The summer was steady. The apartment never felt big enough, but it was filled with the sound of laughter and crayons scratching against paper. I bought small things for the future, a set of dishes I loved, linen napkins still in their packaging. They went into a box labeled "For Later," stacked beside the fridge like an anchor for hope. Then one evening in early October, I was driving home from work when I saw it, an old house with peeling paint and ivy climbing its porch railings. A bright red door stood out against the faded white siding. There was a "For Sale" sign in the yard. I don't know what made me pull over, but I did. The windows were tall and wide, the kind that let sunlight spill in. It looked tired, yes, but not defeated. Something about it felt like possibility. That night, after the kids went to bed, I looked up the listing. 4 bedrooms, heart pine floors, built in 1930, 10 minutes from Leia's school. The price was more than I'd planned, but not impossible. I sat at the table with a pen in my hand, running the numbers over and over until courage outweighed fear. Then I clicked "Schedule a tour." The next week, the kids and I met the real estate agent in the driveway. The air smelled of rain and old wood. Inside the house creaked in the kind of way that felt like history, not disrepair. Leah ran her fingers along the banister and whispered, "It smells like Christmas." Ben twirled in the dining room sunlight, catching in his hair. I stood there, hand on the frame of the doorway, and for the first time in years I could see it, a table big enough for 12 garland on the mantel laughter that belonged entirely to us. 3 weeks later, the house was ours. When I told my parents, Mom said, "Isn't that a bit much for someone in your situation?" Dad just nodded slowly, offering no words of encouragement or pride. Melissa texted a single line, "4 bedrooms." "That's ambitious." I didn't reply. I was too busy pulling up carpet, repainting walls, and scrubbing the floors until they shone. Each room began to take shape. Leah picked lavender paint for her bedroom. Ben chose a dinosaur wallpaper that made him giggle every time he looked at it. I set up a small home office by the window, sunlight streaming across the desk where I'd finally feel like I belonged. One evening, when the last box was unpacked, I stood in the dining room and ran my hand across the table I'd refinished myself. The grain felt smooth beneath my fingertips, warm and steady. I whispered to the empty room, "This year we stay home." By November, the house didn't just look different, it felt alive. The walls carried the sounds of our days, the floorboards echoed with little footsteps. Every evening I'd light a candle by the window and sit at the table while Leah and Ben drew pictures. It became our ritual, a quiet ending to busy days. Then one night, as I brushed Leah's hair before bed, she asked softly, "Mommy, who's coming for Christmas this year?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on making a home that I hadn't imagined filling it yet. But something in her voice, that small hope that hadn't been broken by the past, stirred something deep in me. I smiled into the mirror, met her eyes, and said, "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but I promise you this, we won't be waiting on anyone's porch." The weeks after that night with Leah's quiet question moved quickly. Work filled my days, and the kids filled every other moment. The house was still new enough that every sound carried the creak of floorboards and the hum of the old furnace, reminding me how much of it still needed care. I started waking before dawn, sitting at the dining table with coffee, while the house was still dark. The walls held a calm that felt rare, like the silence after a storm. It wasn't easy, but it was steady. Between early meetings, school drop-offs, and client calls, I learned how to stretch myself in ways that didn't break me. Alan had begun handing me bigger projects at the firm, real clients, real budgets. When a campaign for a small coastal inn went viral online, he congratulated me with a simple, "You earned this," before heading back to his office. That quiet acknowledgement meant more than any family approval ever had. Still, there were nights when the ache would surface. When the house was too still, I'd hear my mother's voice, soft, polished, and dismissive, floating through memory. "Maybe next year, honey." The words carried years of being politely turned away. It wasn't anger I felt, not anymore. It was something quieter. A slow understanding that maybe the space I wanted in that family had never really existed. By early December, Charleston had begun to cool. The city's streets were lined with wreaths and lights, and every store window glowed with some kind of cheer. Leah asked again about Christmas this time, while helping me unpack boxes of decorations I'd kept in storage. "Can we have people over?" she asked, stringing garland across the stair rail, "like a real Christmas." The way she said real stayed with me. That night, after the kids went to bed, I sat at my desk and made a list, not of gifts or groceries, but of people. I wrote down every person who had shown up over the past year when no one else did. Maya, my college roommate, who sent job leads when I first moved back. Mrs. Ellis, my elderly neighbor who checked on us during storms. Jonah and Eric, the couple across the street, who helped me carry furniture that first week. Claire, Leah's art teacher, who stayed late every Thursday because my daughter wanted to finish her paintings. 10 names in all. 10 people who had become more like family than the one I was born into. The more I looked at that list, the more certain I became that this was what Christmas should look like. Not about fixing what was broken, but filling what was empty with something true. The next morning I started planning. I called Maya first. "You're hosting Christmas?" she asked, surprised but smiling through the phone. "You sure you want all that work?" "I think I do," I said. "Actually, I think I need it." She offered to bring wine and a dessert her daughter loved. Others said yes just as easily. The excitement in their voices made the house feel different, lighter somehow, even before the decorations were up. Then, on a whim that made no logical sense, I searched the name Chef Adrian Moss. Years ago, Melissa had dragged us to one of his restaurants and spent the night raving about his truffle risotto. I remembered her bragging for weeks afterward, posting photos like she'd brushed elbows with royalty. I looked up his website, found a number for private bookings, and called. The assistant who answered sounded efficient, almost hurried. "Chef Moss's December is fully booked," she said before I could finish my sentence. "Has been since August." I hesitated, then said, "I'm willing to pay 3 times his standard rate." The line went silent for a moment. "I'll check with the chef and call you back," she said finally. An hour later she did. "Miss Warren," she said, "Chef Moss would be honored to prepare Christmas dinner in your home." For a second I just sat there, the phone warm against my ear. It wasn't about the chef. It was about saying yes to something I would have never believed I deserved before. The next weeks blurred with preparations. I cleaned every corner of the house, replaced the old porch light, and hung a new wreath on the red door. The dining room became the center of it all. I found a set of crystal glasses on sale and ordered cloth napkins in deep green. The menu came from Chef Moss himself: herb-crusted lamb, smoked mushroom ravioli, and chocolate soufflé with spiced cream. When the invitations were ready, I didn't print them. I wrote each one by hand. Across the top I wrote, "Join us for Christmas, a celebration of chosen family and good food." At the bottom, a single line, "Seats have already been made. All you need to do is arrive hungry and loved." By the time Christmas morning came, the house glowed with sunlight and the smell of rosemary and butter. Leia helped me tie ribbons on napkins while Ben counted plates at the table. 10, he said proudly. 10 chairs. At 2:00, the first knock came. Maya arrived with her daughter, arms full of wine and laughter. Mrs. Ellis followed, carrying a tin of cookies tied with a red bow. Jonah and Eric brought a handmade wreath still dusted with pine scent. One by one, the house filled. Warmth replaced the old quiet, every sound landing like a promise that we had built something real. Chef Moss and his 2 assistants moved around the kitchen like it was their stage plating dishes that looked too beautiful to eat. He explained each course softly, his voice blending with the hum of conversation and children's laughter. For the first time, my dining table, the same one I'd refinished by hand, was surrounded by people who wanted to be there. After dessert, we moved to the living room. Leia played Candyland with Eric, while Ben fell asleep on Mrs. Ellis's lap. The fire crackled low and quiet jazz drifted through the room. I looked around and saw joy where tension used to live. No tight smiles, no silent comparisons, just peace. When the night wound down, I took a few photos. One of the table glowing under candlelight, one of Leia and Ben laughing in the kitchen, and one of everyone together, glasses raised mid-toast. I posted them later with 3 short captions: "Grateful for friends who feel like family. When Christmas feels like coming home. December 25th, surrounded by love." I wasn't expecting much from it, just a way to hold the memory still. But within an hour, my phone lit up with messages, likes, comments, and one name I hadn't seen in a while: Melissa. Then came another mom, and another dad. The texts started simple questions, disguised as curiosity. Was that really Chef Moss in the photo? How did you even book him? And finally from Melissa, why didn't you invite us? I stared at that last one longer than I should have. Because deep down, we both already knew the answer. The photo I'd posted that night was meant for no one in particular, just a snapshot of a moment that had finally felt whole. But by the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts from friends poured in full of kind words and emojis, the kind of easy affection that used to surprise me. Then came the messages. I hadn't expected one from Melissa, another from Mom, and a missed call from Dad. When I opened Melissa's text, the words sat sharp on the screen. Was that really Chef Moss? How did you even book him, and why didn't you invite us? The first 2 questions read like curiosity. The last one didn't. I set the phone down and looked around the quiet kitchen. The plates from Christmas dinner were stacked neatly beside the sink, still smelling faintly of rosemary and wine. The candles had burned down to stubs. The house felt peaceful, like it had exhaled after holding its breath for years. I decided not to answer. Not yet. 3 days passed before I saw the beige SUV pull into my driveway. It was early afternoon, the sky pale and cold sunlight spilling weakly through the clouds. I watched from the window as Melissa stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement, a gift bag swinging from one hand. She didn't text or call first, just walked straight to the door like she owned the path. When she knocked, it was quick and sharp. I opened the door halfway. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We need to talk," she said, brushing past me before I could invite her in. The warmth of the house met her like a wall. She looked around slowly, eyes tracing every garland, every framed photo, every hint of the celebration she hadn't been part of. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Nice place," she said. "Didn't realize you were doing this well." I closed the door quietly behind her. "You can sit if you want," I said, gesturing toward the couch. She stayed standing. "So you really hired the Chef Moss?" Her tone was half disbelief, half accusation. "I did," I said. "You know how many times I've tried to book him for Mom's birthday?" She asked, her voice tightening. "Apparently he doesn't work with rude clients." The jab landed between us, small but deliberate. I didn't respond. Silence stretched long enough for her to lose patience. "You've always been dramatic, Natalie," she snapped. "Posting those photos, it looked petty. Like you were trying to make us look bad." I met her gaze steadily. "You didn't need my help for that." Her face hardened. "You're mad about one Christmas, and suddenly you throw some extravagant dinner to show off. You act like we abandoned you." "One Christmas?" I asked softly. "Do you remember the last time I was invited to a family event where I wasn't treated like a guest who showed up by mistake?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. I waited. "Go ahead," I said. "Name one." "I just think it's sad," she said after a moment, shifting her purse strap higher on her shoulder. "All this talk about chosen family, it's like you're trying to replace us. It looks like revenge." "It's not revenge," I said quietly. "It's healing." She gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Healing? You call hiring a celebrity chef and showing off online healing?" I took a breath, steadying my voice. "You spent years making me feel like I didn't belong, like my kids were too much, like I should be grateful for leftovers and porch steps. I stopped asking for space in a place that never had any for me." Melissa shifted, the confidence slipping from her posture. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "You did," I said, "whether you meant to or not." Her eyes dropped to the floor. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said softly, "Mom's been crying for days. She feels humiliated. People at church saw those photos. They're asking why you weren't at Christmas." "She can tell them the truth," I said evenly, "that there wasn't room." "She regrets that," Melissa murmured. "Does she?" I asked. "Or is she just upset that people noticed?" She let out a shaky breath. "I know we haven't been fair to you," she said, "but this felt like a slap." I looked her straight in the eye. "Good," I said, "because now you understand how it feels." Her lips parted as if to argue, then pressed shut again. She sat down at last, sinking into the couch like the weight of years had caught up to her. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "You already did," I said quietly. "The day you decided your comfort mattered more than my presence. The day you closed the door and told me to come by for leftovers." She stared at the floor for a long time. "What do you want?" she finally asked. I walked over to the mantel and picked up one of the watercolor cards Claire had painted for us. It showed our red front door with a small wreath and snow on the steps. "I want respect," I said, "not pity, not an invitation out of guilt. Just basic human respect." Her voice was small. "And if we change, if we really try," I turned to her, "then maybe we can be family again. But it has to start with honesty, with showing up, not when it looks good, but when it matters." Silence filled the room, heavy but clean. She nodded slowly. "Then I'll try," she said, voice almost a whisper. "Good," I said, standing a little taller, "because this time I'm not making space for anyone who doesn't bring their whole heart." When she finally left, the air felt still. The light outside had turned soft and gold, stretching across the porch in long lines. I closed the door gently behind her and leaned against it for a moment, listening to the quiet. For once, it didn't feel empty. Later that evening, Leah came downstairs, rubbing her eyes and clutching her blanket. "Mommy," she said sleepily, climbing onto the couch beside me. "Why did Aunt Melissa come?" "She wanted to talk," I said. "Is she mad?" "No, sweetheart," I said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "She's just learning what I looked at her, those wide, unguarded eyes that still believed love was something safe. Learning how to love better," I said. She nodded, resting her head on my arm. "I like our kind of love better," she whispered. I watched the fire flicker low in the hearth, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the night. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. I just let the warmth settle in, steady and real. Outside, the wreath on the red door swayed gently in the winter wind, and somewhere deep down I knew that conversation had shifted something not just between sisters, but in the rhythm of our family. The old balance had cracked, leaving room for something new to grow. After Melissa left that night, the quiet in the house felt different. Not heavy, not sharp, just new. The fire had burned down to embers, and the Christmas lights on the mantel flickered softly against the walls. I stayed on the couch listening to the faint hum of the furnace and the steady rhythm of Leah's breathing beside me. She'd fallen asleep against my arm, still clutching her blanket. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't hurt. It simply existed. Over the next few days, the stillness of the holiday lingered. Snow had melted into slush along the sidewalks, and the world outside seemed to slow down. Inside life found a gentle rhythm again. Morning cartoons, cocoa mugs left half full, the clatter of toys underfoot. Ben lined up his new train set across the living room, narrating softly to himself, while Leah painted a picture of the Christmas table, everyone's faces glowing under candlelight. When she handed it to me, I noticed she'd drawn an extra chair near the edge, empty but waiting. By the end of the week, I started noticing the small ways life was filling itself in. Mrs. Ellis began stopping by once a week with banana bread wrapped in wax paper. Jonah and Eric helped replace the light fixture in my hallway, joking about how it took 3 adults to screw in one bulb. Claire offered to teach Leah watercolor techniques after school, saying she saw something special in her brushstrokes. It wasn't a family built from history, it was one built from showing up. One evening after putting the kids to bed, I stood by the window with a cup of tea and watched the snow start again. The world outside was soft and quiet. The red door on my porch glowed faintly in the streetlight, its wreath swaying in the wind. I thought about Melissa's face that day, the mix of pride and hurt, and the small crack in her voice when she said she'd try. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. A week into January, Leah asked me a question while I was brushing her hair. "Mommy, is it okay to say no to people if they make you feel small?" She said it so calmly that for a second I forgot to breathe. "Yes," I said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "It's more than okay, it's important." "Good," she said, smiling, with the quiet certainty of a child who'd just passed a test. "Because I don't want to invite the cousins to my birthday party. They're always mean." I nodded slowly. "That's your choice, sweetheart. You get to decide who feels good to be around." She grinned, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Then I'll just invite the nice people, like Mrs. Ellis and Eric, and maybe Chef Moss if he's not busy." I laughed softly, tucking her in. When I turned off the light, I lingered at the door, watching her drift to sleep. It hit me then that what I was building wasn't just a home. It was a language of worth that my children were learning sentence by sentence. That weekend we decorated for Leah's birthday. She helped tape glittery invitations along the wall, each one covered in hand-drawn hearts. I noticed she left a few envelopes untouched on the counter ones, with names she didn't want to write. I didn't ask. The choice was hers, and I understood the weight behind it. Sunday morning, as the smell of cupcakes filled the house, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mom. "Your father and I would like to see the children. Perhaps we can do something for your birthday." I read it twice, setting the phone down between the mixing bowls. They hadn't mentioned Christmas or the photos, or Melissa's visit, just the children, not me. For a long time I stood there, the silence of the kitchen pressing in. Then I picked up the spatula and kept stirring. Some words didn't need a reply, not right away. By the time guests arrived that afternoon, the house was filled with warmth again. Maya came with her daughter, carrying a stack of colorful plates. Jonah brought balloons that refused to fit through the door. Mrs. Ellis carried a gift, wrapped in old newspaper tied with twine. "Books," she said proudly. "Every girl needs stories." We sang, laughed, and spilled frosting everywhere. Leia's cheeks glowed pink as she blew out her candles. Ben clapped so hard his hands turned red. When everyone had gone home, the house smelled like sugar and happiness. That night, as I tucked them in, Leia reached for my hand. "Mommy, can I tell you something?" "Of course." She looked at me seriously. "I think Grandma and Aunt Melissa don't know how to love right. But maybe they'll learn. Because you did." I felt something shift inside me. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Maybe they will," I said softly. "But even if they don't, we'll be okay." Later, when the house was still, I finally replied to Mom's message. "The kids are doing well. Their schedule is full, and so is our life. If you'd like to reconnect, it has to begin with honesty and respect. I'm no longer entertaining anything less." I hit send and set the phone face down. The message didn't need a response. It was an ending and a beginning at once. Over the next few weeks, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt clean. The kind of quiet that comes after closing a door that's been creaking for too long. In that space, new sounds began to fill the air. Laughter from the kids, the clink of dishes as friends helped me clean up after dinners, the hum of the radio while I worked late into the night. One Saturday, Chef Moss called unexpectedly. He wanted to confirm our next Christmas date early. "Same menu," he asked. Mostly I said, smiling. "But maybe add something sweet this time. Maple glazed carrots and s'mores for the kids." He chuckled. "Consider it done." When I hung up, I looked around the house. The living room scattered with toys, the faint scent of paint from Leia's art project. Ben's laughter echoing down the hall. Everything was far from perfect, but it was real. The red door gleamed in the afternoon light, a reminder of how far we'd come from that porch where we once stood waiting. As I cleaned up, I noticed Leia's painting again, the one of the Christmas table. This time the empty chair didn't feel sad. It felt like space, a space that could one day be filled by someone willing to show up the right way. The thought didn't ache anymore. It simply rested there, soft and patient, like hope learning how to breathe. By late February, the air had begun to soften again. The last of the winter frost clung to the trees, and the sidewalks were slick with meltwater, but the promise of spring hung somewhere in the stillness. Life in our house found a quiet rhythm that no longer revolved around waiting for someone else's approval. Mornings started with cereal bowls clinking and the smell of coffee. Evenings ended with Leia's laughter echoing from her room while Ben hummed himself to sleep beside his stuffed reindeer. I worked steadily, balancing clients and campaigns, still taking on the occasional freelance project after the kids were in bed. Alan stopped by my desk one afternoon with a small grin. "You've got a knack for balance, Natalie," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "Think you're ready for your own account?" It wasn't a promotion exactly, more a vote of confidence, but it landed like sunlight after a long gray stretch. The next few weeks were busy. I met new clients, rearranged the kids' schedules, and tried not to overthink the quiet that had settled between me and my family. Melissa hadn't called since Christmas, and Mom's message still sat unanswered at the bottom of my phone. Every now and then I'd open it just to remind myself that silence was also a kind of choice. One Saturday morning, Leia sat at the kitchen table drawing while I cleaned up breakfast. "Mommy," she said suddenly, "do you think Grandma misses us?" Her question was so simple, so unguarded, it made me pause mid-motion. "I think she might," I said, carefully wiping my hands on a towel. "Then why doesn't she call?" I looked at her small face, the pencil smudge on her cheek, the curiosity in her eyes that didn't yet understand adult distance. Sometimes, I said, people need time to learn how to love the right way. She nodded like she understood more than I expected and went back to coloring. When she was done, she held up the picture, a red door with 3 stick figures standing on the porch. "That's us," she said proudly. "Because we stay home now." Her words sat with me the rest of the day. That afternoon, Maya stopped by for coffee while her daughter played with Leia upstairs. We sat by the window, sunlight spilling across the table. "You seem lighter," she said after a while, "like you finally let go of something heavy." "Maybe I did," I said. "Or maybe it just stopped holding me." She smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "That's the same thing." As winter turned to early spring, I noticed small changes everywhere: the kids sleeping better, me laughing easier, the house feeling less like a project and more like a home. On evenings when I worked late, Jonah would wave from across the street, and Mrs. Ellis would drop off tea cookies just because. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was steady. Then one morning in March, I found a letter in the mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, looping, deliberate. My mother's. The envelope was cream-colored, her return address printed in gold ink. I stood on the porch for a long time before opening it. "Dear Natalie, your sister told me about her visit. She said you were kind but firm. I suppose that's fair. I've spent many nights thinking about how things turned out. You were right there, should have been room for you. There always was, I just didn't make it. I hope one day you'll forgive me. Maybe we can have dinner soon, just the four of us. Love, Mom." The words were neat, careful, but they didn't sound like her voice. They sounded like something she thought forgiveness should look like, not something she truly felt. I folded the letter and set it on the counter without deciding what to do next. That evening, Melissa called. "Mom told me she wrote you," she said quickly as though the words were heavy. "She's trying Natalie. Maybe you could meet her halfway." I held the phone against my shoulder, looking out the window at the kids playing in the yard. "Halfway's a long road," I said softly. "She misses the kids," Melissa added. "So do I," I said. "But missing someone doesn't erase how they treated you." She sighed. "I know. But maybe this is the start of something," maybe I said, "if it's real." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time staring at the folded letter. It wasn't anger that kept me still. It was clarity. I'd spent years trying to read between the lines of my family's apologies, looking for sincerity that never quite appeared. This time, I wasn't going to interpret. I was going to wait until actions spoke for themselves. Days passed. The letter stayed on the counter, the edges curling slightly. Every morning I walked by it knowing I didn't owe an answer just because someone had decided to offer one. The power wasn't in responding. It was in choosing when and if to respond at all. By April, the air was warm again. The magnolias bloomed across Charleston, filling the streets with the smell of something clean and new. At work, Alan announced I'd been nominated for a local creative award. "You've built quite a reputation," he said, smiling. "Your clients love you." That night, Leia made a card out of printer paper. It had a stick figure version of me holding a trophy drawn in red crayon. At the top, she wrote, "Best Mommy Award." I taped it beside her painting of the Christmas table. Side by side, they looked like proof of everything I'd built when no one believed I could. In early May, a new message arrived from Mom again. "We'd love to see the children before school ends. Maybe ice cream in the park." There was no mention of me, no mention of what stood between us, just the same pattern softened by manners. That night after dinner, Leia brought it up again. "Do I have to go if I don't want to?" she asked. "No," I said gently. "You never have to go anywhere that doesn't feel good." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Then I think I want to stay here." "Okay," I said, smiling. "That's what we'll do." When she went upstairs, I sat by the window, the warm night air drifting through the open glass. I thought of that red door again, how it used to symbolize a dream, and how now it was simply our reality. We didn't wait outside anymore. We didn't knock or hope to be let in. We belonged where we stood. A few nights later, Jonah and Eric came by for dinner. Mrs. Ellis brought her favorite peach cobbler, and Maya arrived with flowers from her garden. We ate late into the evening, the sound of laughter spilling through the open windows. When everyone left, I sat at the table, candlelight flickering across the faces in the photos on the wall. The family I'd chosen had grown without permission, without approval, and without condition. The next morning, I found Leia in the yard, barefoot and smiling, holding a dandelion puff. Make a wish, I said. She shook her head. I already did. What for? For us to always have room, she said simply, letting the seeds scatter into the wind. I watched them drift away, the morning light catching on each one like a tiny promise. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the shift again, the kind that told me we were finally standing on the other side of everything that used to hold us back. Summer came in slow this year, the kind that stretched the daylight long enough for the kids to stay barefoot until dark. The red door, once just a symbol of starting over, had become the center of our lives, always swinging open for laughter, for neighbors, for whoever needed a place to breathe. Inside the walls were lined with watercolor paintings, photographs from birthdays, and school projects hung crookedly but proudly. The house finally looked lived in full, in the best kind of way. By June, work was steady. I'd taken on more clients than ever, and Alan mentioned a promotion on the horizon. But success looked different now. It wasn't about climbing for validation. It was about having enough time, peace, and space to raise Leah and Ben without that quiet fear of falling behind. It had been months since I'd heard from my parents. The silence no longer sat heavy. It just existed like background noise. Every so often, Melissa would text brief updates. Mom's been keeping to herself. Dad's garden is thriving. Nothing more, nothing less. I answered politely but rarely asked questions. Some distance feels like air. You learn to breathe better in it. That August, a small envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a printed invitation on heavy cardstock family brunch, hosted by Melissa and David Bennett. A postscript at the bottom read, "Mom and Dad would love to see you and the kids." The words felt too formal, almost rehearsed, like they'd been debated before being sent. I placed it on the counter beside a grocery list and a drawing of a rainbow Ben had made. When I mentioned it to Maya that evening, she looked at me over her coffee mug. "Are you going?" "I don't know," I said. "Part of me feels like it's a test. Another part wonders if it's just time." She smiled gently. "Maybe it can be both." A week later, I drove to the Bennett's home, a white two-story with manicured hedges and the same polished energy Melissa had always loved. Leah sat in the back seat, humming her fingers, tracing fog on the window. Ben clutched his stuffed reindeer, his comfort in new places. As I parked by the curb, I felt something in my chest tighten. Old habits reminding me to brace for judgment. The door opened before we reached it. Melissa stood there in a floral dress, her smile tentative. "You came," she said quietly, as if she hadn't believed I would. "Yeah," I said. "We came." Inside the table was set with care linen napkins, fresh flowers, and plates that matched perfectly. Mom and Dad sat near the window. Mom's posture was straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When she saw the kids, she rose, her expression softening for just a moment. "My, how they've grown," she said. Leah looked at me before stepping forward to hug her. Ben followed hesitantly, gripping my hand until the last second. We sat. Conversation stayed safe at first. School updates, whether small talk about work. Melissa's husband filled gaps with polite jokes. The air was civil, even warm, until Mom reached for her teacup and spoke carefully. "Natalie, I hope you know I've thought a lot about the past year, about Christmas." The room went still. She continued, voice steady but cautious. "I didn't mean to make you feel unwelcome. I thought I was keeping things simple, but I see now that I was keeping you out." I nodded, unsure what to say. Her words weren't quite an apology, but they carried a weight she hadn't acknowledged before. Melissa looked between us. "We weren't fair," she said softly. "To you or the kids. I don't know if we can fix it all, but I want to try." For a long moment, I said nothing. The kids whispered beside me, their small voices grounding the tension. Finally, I took a slow breath. "Trying is a start," I said. Mom's eyes glistened, though her expression stayed composed. "Your grandmother used to say love is just making room," she said quietly. I think I forgot that. The meal moved gently after that, careful but genuine. Leah told stories about her art projects. Ben showed off his new dinosaur knowledge. Every laugh felt like a cautious bridge being built, plank by plank. When we said goodbye, Mom hugged me longer than she ever had. "You have a beautiful home, Natalie," she said, "and a beautiful heart." On the drive home, the kids fell asleep in the back seat, their heads leaning together. The highway stretched quiet and long under the summer sun. I thought about what forgiveness really looked like, not the grand gestures, but the small ones that start with showing up even when you don't know how it'll end. That night, I tucked Leia into bed. She blinked sleepily and asked Mommy, did Grandma say sorry? In her own way, I said. Did you forgive her? I paused. Not all the way, I said, but I'm getting there. She nodded, satisfied, and turned over. That's okay, she whispered. Forgiving takes practice. Over the next few months, we found a slow rhythm of cautious contact holiday texts, photos of the kids, occasional calls. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress measured in small, deliberate steps. Melissa stopped defending the past and started asking questions instead. Mom sent recipes she thought the kids might like. Dad began ending his calls with, "Proud of you, Nat," as if trying the words on for the first time. By late autumn, the Red Door had seen another year of birthdays, dinners, and laughter. Jonah and Eric helped hang string lights across the porch. Maya brought pumpkin pie, and Mrs. Ellis knitted a scarf for Ben that he refused to take off. One night after everyone left, I stepped outside. The yard was quiet leaves, scattered like old memories that had finally lost their sting. From across the street, Melissa's car slowed as she passed by. She rolled down the window and smiled. "Thank you for coming that day," she called out. "Thank you for asking me," I said. She nodded once, then drove on. When I turned back toward the house, the porch light glowed against the Red Door. Behind it, I could hear the kids giggling from their rooms. The sound carried through the night steady, certain alive. It was the sound of a life that had learned how to make room, not excuses. The first cold day of December came early that year. The wind carried a bite, the kind that hinted winter was ready to settle in for good. Inside, our home glowed with the same warmth it had every year since the day I'd bought it, light spilling from the windows, cinnamon simmering on the stove, the hum of laughter floating through the rooms. Laya and Ben were decorating the tree, their giggles breaking the quiet as they argued about who got to hang the last ornament. The Red Door, freshly polished, gleamed behind them like a heartbeat. As I watched them, I thought about how far that door had carried us. From the nights we sat on someone else's porch, waiting for an invitation that never came, to the mornings that now started with our own keys, turning in a lock that belonged only to us. Every inch of this house held proof of the life we built from the ground up, a table that had hosted laughter instead of pity, walls filled with drawings instead of silence, and a front porch that had become a welcome sign for anyone who needed a place to belong. This Christmas was already taking shape. Chef Moss had confirmed months ago, same date, same warmth, with a few new touches for the kids. Leia had requested maple-glazed carrots, and Ben had insisted on s'mores for dessert. The guest list had grown again, Maya and her daughter Mrs. Ellis, Jonah, and Eric, Claire, and even a few new friends from work. 12 chairs this time, each one chosen with intention. A week before the dinner, I got a message from Melissa. "If you're still hosting, I'd like to come. Not for the food, just to be part of it." I read it twice before replying. "There's a seat for you if you're ready to show up for real." Her answer came within minutes. "I will." On Christmas Day, the morning light poured through the kitchen windows just as it had the year before. The scent of rosemary and butter filled the air. Leia twirled in her red dress, while Ben stacked napkins beside the plates, whisper counting under his breath. By 2:00, the house was full again, people carrying casseroles, gifts, and hugs that felt like home. When the doorbell rang once more, I knew it was her. Melissa stood on the porch, coat buttoned high, eyes soft but unsure. She held a tin of cookies, the same kind our grandmother used to make. "I didn't want to show up empty-handed," she said quietly. I smiled and stepped aside. "You didn't." Dinner that evening was different, not because of the food or the table, but because every person there was present in a way that felt honest. Melissa laughed with Maya, complimented Claire's painting, and helped Mrs. Ellis serve dessert. The kids darted between rooms, sticky-fingered and happy. When the plates were cleared and the house hummed with soft music, Melissa turned to me. "You really did it," she said. "You built something beautiful." "We did," I said. I just stopped waiting for permission. Later that night, after the guests left, and the house grew quiet again. Leia crawled onto the couch beside me, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Did Aunt Melissa do better this time?" she asked. "She did," I said. "Then maybe she learned," she murmured, resting her head on my shoulder. "Maybe she did," I said, kissing the top of her hair. When the fire burned low, I walked to the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall, blanketing the yard and softening the edges of everything. The red door shone beneath the porch light, its color deep and steady against the white. I thought about the years before, the night spent waiting outside, the words swallowed to keep the peace, the slow, quiet work of rebuilding a life no one thought I could. The truth was, forgiveness didn't arrive like a storm or a single grand gesture. It came in pieces, a steady text thread with my sister, an honest letter from my mother that finally used the word sorry. A new photo of my parents with Laia and Ben at a park on a sunny afternoon. Small steps, not perfect ones. And maybe that was the lesson hiding underneath all those winters. The kind of justice that matters most isn't about making someone pay. It's about refusing to keep living smaller than you deserve. It's about choosing peace over permission, building the table when the door keeps closing, and knowing that love, the real kind, always makes room. As I turned off the lights, I caught my reflection in the window, tired, older, but calm in a way I hadn't known before. The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt earned. Leia's painting still hung by the fridge, the one that used to have an empty chair near the edge. This year she'd added another figure, her aunt sitting close, holding a cup of cocoa. I smiled. The table was finally full. If you've ever had to build your own space after being turned away, I hope you know you're not alone. Sometimes peace isn't something you find, it's something you create. And if this story stayed with you tonight, take a moment before you go, think about the tables you've built, the doors you've opened, and the kind of love that has made room for you.